Over the weekend, a migrant ship capsized in the Mediterranean, killing hundreds. And so far, 2015 is shaping up to break records on total numbers of deaths in those migrant capsizing situations. The ship, which carried 700 people but was only about 70 feet long, capsized off the coast of Libya when its passengers crowded to one side trying to flag down a Portuguese commercial ship. As of Monday, only 28 survivors have been rescued. The other 670 or so are probably dead. Just last week, another shipwreck killed about 400 people. Last year, about 4,868 people died trying to get to Europe, making it by far the deadliest border crossing in the world. And we see news reports coming out every week of 200, 500, 900 people dying in these absolutely massive losses of life in ships like you're seeing in these photographs right now, where you have hundreds of people per 10 feet crammed onto these inadequately staffed, inadequately equipped migrant crossing ships. Very often we find out that they are actually piloted by migrants who agreed to do that in exchange for being allowed to cross. The actual people who set up these crossings do not get on the ships because they're worried about being taken in if a naval vessel takes the ship. It's just tragic, the number of people that are dying. I mean, we have, in a comparison to last year, which by the way also broke records, by April 15th of last year, 17 migrants had been killed. By April 19th of this year, 1,600 migrants had. It's 100 times as many deaths 1 year to year. And peak migration season hasn't even started yet. It's typically May through September. So we're off peak and we're already seeing record numbers of deaths.
Now, there have been some questions about whether or not the rescue operations that are being mounted by European countries is encouraging migration. You know, oh, if you go out there and say, yeah, we'll save you if you get this far and you start to capsize, and that is somehow encouraging people to go out. And I suppose there might be some aspect to that. Oh, you know, we'll try to get out there. We'll try to see if we can get ourselves off to the Mediterranean, and then they'll save us if we get into trouble. But to me, that just seems illogical. Because if folks realize that they're possibly going to die in case the rescue operations don't get there in time, I think what you're running from must be so horrible that you are willing to, of course, risk your own life and the lives of your children in order to be able to get the hell out of there.
To get a chance to get the hell out of there.
Yeah, just the chance of getting the hell out of there. Because in a lot of ways, you know, if you just get to a certain point across the Mediterranean, if you can just land on even some of the little tiny islands like Lampedusa, which is this teeny tiny island out in the Mediterranean, if they can just get that far, then they're on Italian soil, and then at least they have to be processed.
Yes.
And they get a foothold. Not necessarily they don't get to stay, but at least they get a foothold and they made it that far and they're not, you know, drowning in the ocean. This is a horrible humanitarian crisis that we have going on right now.
Yeah, that isn't receiving much coverage. I mean, even CNN, who loves a ferry or a plane story, this is a ferry filled up with people from Africa, so it merits less coverage.
Yes.
And I think we do have to differentiate between the possible effect that those rescue operations could have on the motivations of the people setting up the ships and those getting on the ships. I think that the average person, they're being driven by civil unrest, the threat of ISIS, dictatorships, economic hardship. I think those are fairly constant, perhaps getting worse year by year. But I think that the people setting up the ships, they might be more heavily relying on the fact that legally you do have to respond to distress calls.
Yes.
Now, we do know overall that there's an absolutely massive number of migrants both crossing recently and waiting to cross. So an Italian official estimated in 2014 that 600,000 migrants were waiting in Libya to get their chance to come to Europe. Another 3 years worth of migration, even at last year's high rates. So that's a huge pool waiting to cross. It's also a huge number of migrants crossing over into literally just a couple of countries, Italy, Greece, and a couple of those island nations, receiving hundreds of thousands of migrants every year. And I worry about their ability to actually process that many people, let alone incorporate them into their population. And also, those the rescue operations, we have to note, have been scaled back heavily, perhaps to try to dissuade some of those crossing. But in the short term, at least, we see many more deaths as a result of it. So Italy has a program called Mare Nostrum, it means our sea, where they had largely been taking the brunt of these rescue operations in the Mediterranean. That was credited with saving hundreds of thousands of lives, which is pretty amazing. But last year, the European Union's border patrol agency, Frontex, took over from Mare Nostrum and replaced it with a much more limited operation called Triton, spending about 1/7 of the money that Italy had on its own. And we already see the effect that appears to have in the number of lives being lost in literally just 3 or 4 months so far this year.
Yeah, it's actually, in a way, it's stepped up the number of lives being lost. So, you know, it's a really difficult situation, and I don't, and it's understandable that the folks that are in these countries that these migrants are landing in, refugees as well, that they don't have the capacity to deal with this influx. And so, what is it? What do you do? And it seems like the European Union has begun to talk about ways to address the humanitarian crises in the places these people are fleeing from. You have folks from Somalia, from Eritrea, from parts of the
Syria.
From Syria, from Libya, where now these are different places with different destabilizing regimes going on. With Libya, we had a hand in that, the United States, and in Syria as well. Destabilizing the Middle East, gosh, it has consequences. Who could have predicted? And then, when it comes to what kinds of efforts are undertaken, what are our priorities? Are our priorities to save lives and prevent loss of life from these migrants? Are our priorities to basically, prevent them from coming over and say
to try to
good
stop
luck
them
to
from
you.
launching the boats in the first
Exactly,
place? And how would you do that?
Exactly, because there really is not enough of a government presence, it seems, in Libya and in Syria to patrol their own borders and to patrol the waters there to prevent migrants from leaving. It's a really difficult situation. And, what is the priority? If the priority is to stop loss of life, then it seems like not only do you have to mount the rescue operations, but you also have to address the root causes. And this gets into foreign aid.
And that is a massive issue.
That's a huge
issue.
And
in some ways we are trying to. Arguably America is, in Syria at least, trying to long-term help with stability. But are we really?
After you break it, you bought it, right?
Are we talking about in 10 years? Eventually fewer people will be fleeing Syria because there won't be that many people left to flee. They've already lost a huge percentage of their population to relocation efforts. And when you have people willing to travel all the way from Syria all the way to Libya just for a chance to cross into Europe, and Libya is basically funneling a dozen, 24 countries worth of migrants, I don't know how you shut off all of that. And I don't know whose responsibility is it. Is it Italy? Is it the EU? Does America care enough to make it happen?
Yeah.
It's difficult to say.
Well, and also we have, of course, our own immigration problem here in the United States. When we have this influx of immigration and we don't have a sane policy for dealing with it right now, and that's obviously going to be a huge issue for the 2016 presidential election. But remember the big crisis with the Central American children coming north, I guess it was this time last year about. And
over how much actual due process they should have before being sent back, and the Republicans trying to scale it back without a hearing.
And it doesn't really work when you have these sort of demagoguery responses. There was one UK politician who basically called them cockroaches, called these migrants cockroaches, and that they should be fired upon.
Yeah, gunships should meet them.
Exactly, instead of rescue operations.
It might be cheaper in the short run, but it seems a little bit inhuman.
It might be, it might be considered, I don't know, a war crime or something.
Yeah, especially when these are, for the vast majority, are just regular people trying to flee unrest. In the same way that if it was happening in our country, we would probably do the same.
Yeah.
But again, you're not going to see a lot about this. That's why it was, I think, important that we spread those photographs. But you're talking about boats that are specifically chosen because they are in such poor condition that if they were to capsize, the people sending them out wouldn't really care monetarily. You have people basically in slavery working to pay off their eventual ticket. Again, no one is licensed or prepared or trained to pilot these ships. They say that they're effectively given a compass and maybe a GPS and then told to go towards an island 70 miles away. Good luck with that. This is absolutely inhuman, and it's getting worse year by year, and nobody aside from previously the Italians seems to care all that much about fixing the problem.